everyone. So this is part one of my penny tutorial where I will be showing you how to draw this beautiful brown Cocker Spaniel in colour pencils. I hope you enjoy this tutorial and I hope you find it useful. As I say, this is just part one, so if you want to obviously follow on with the full tutorial, I'd recommend subscribing to me on YouTube. So this is the reference that I'm going to be working from to draw this piece. I took this, I think it was last week. Me and Penny had a little photo shoot on the driveway. I took about 50 pictures and this was one of my favourite ones. If you want to be able to print this out for yourselves, head over to my Instagram account, which is at isabelashwin_art, and then in the highlights section at the top of my account I've highlighted this image, so you should be able to find it there. I've also posted it into my group on Facebook, which is called Colour Pencil Artists. So if you're not already a member, you can request to join that group and you should be able to find this reference in there by searching my name. So yeah, I'm just going to get started. Okay, so let's just jump straight in. Now, my drawing, I'm using Fabriano Artistico hot press watercolour paper. It's just my favourite surface. I have tried other surfaces in the past, but I keep going back to hot press watercolour paper. So that's what I'm going to be filming this tutorial on. And to begin with, I'm going to jump straight in with the Polychromos Dark Indigo. Now, if you're a member of my Patreon channel, you'll probably know 98% of the time I always begin a drawing with the Polychromos Dark Indigo, and I like to use it to pick out the darkest tones of whatever sort of area I'm working on. Now for this piece I'm going to begin focusing on probably this sort of the nose and the mouth section, and then that means that we also have to darken up the sort of shadow area around the outside here. So if you look at the photo reference that we're working from, this sort of muzzle area, is that what it's called? I think that's what it's called, is all quite light in comparison to the darker areas around it. Now these areas are important because having this so dark is what makes this area here stand out. And that's what adds depth. So the darkest areas of a drawing are really important, which is why when I focus on a particular area, I like to get those in first. So as I say, I'm going to start with the Polychromos Dark Indigo, and I'm just going to begin by sketching in those little sort of nostrils, so the very darkest areas of the nose. And I'm going to sort of draw around the outside of the shape. And then I'm just going to fill this in very lightly. Now this is our first layer, obviously, of colour pencil. So I don't like to use a hard pressure and I don't like to burnish too much at this point, because I like to build up lots of light layers to create my drawings, because I find that it can add depth. So building up with those nice light layers of lovely colours, you'll probably see in this, I'll do some glazing with some really vibrant colours, some bright reds, some purples. So if you burnish your paper and fill in the tooth of the paper too early on, you then can't, or it's harder to go over that in later stages when you're adding sort of the final details, or if you want to glaze with some nice colours or anything like that. So that's why I'm using a nice light pressure to begin with. And as I say, I'm just sketching in those dark little nostril shapes. If you are wondering, by the way, how I like to create my stencils, I've got a whole separate video on that. So if you just have a look at my channel, I think it was actually, it could have been the first ever video that I ever uploaded to YouTube, now I think about it. Or if not, it was definitely one of the first ones. So yeah, if you want to see sort of how I create my stencils, I'd recommend watching that video, because it's sort of more in depth than to what I would be able to sort of go into now. So we've got the little nostril shapes in. I also want to sketch in that little line, it's sort of like a dark line that goes up the middle of her nose. And again, I'm using a nice light pressure. Okay, and then we also have little darker areas here. And often you find that once you put in the darkest areas of whatever you're sort of focusing on, just the darkest tones can really help to sort of build up the shape of whatever you're drawing. So already I can sort of see the shape of the nose starting to emerge. So then we've also got another darker area here. So now, still using my dark indigo, but I'm using an even lighter pressure. So I'm almost just sort of lightly glazing now. When I say glazing, I just mean a nice light, even layer. Let me just get my little brush. And avoiding the highlights underneath the nostrils here, I'm just going to give everything else a real light glaze. I'd recommend, I mean, I've used graphite pencil to create this stencil, and I'd recommend sort of erasing it as you go along, because I've done drawings in the past where I haven't erased the graphite from the paper, and then it's strange. It's almost like the colour pencil doesn't quite sort of overlay the graphite. So it's hard to then sort of burnish when you get to the later stages. And then also you often end up just with like a really visible sort of almost like a shiny line where the graphite was. So yeah, that's why I'm sort of erasing my stencil as I go. So as I say, I'm using an even lighter pressure now compared to how dark these are here. And you can actually get lots of different tones just by using one pencil, and it all comes down to the pressure that you apply. Okay, so my nose is starting to take shape. I'm going to use slightly more pressure, and I'm just going to darken up. It's almost in sort of like a bit of a triangular shape in the middle here. So I'm just using a little bit more pressure. As I say, I'm really not burnishing at this stage. And by burnishing, I mean completely sort of filling the tooth of the paper, because we do have a lot of layers to go. And then I just want a nice fade at the top of the nose here. So how I do that is, obviously I'm using a very light pressure anyway, but as I work up this way, I just ease off on the pressure until I'm not touching the paper. And then that way you get a really nice sort of smooth gradient, and it's sort of, the pencil just sort of fades out. You don't have any harsh lines. Now, there's a little bit of a darker line that goes across the top of her nose, which is quite handy actually, because it means that we can just lightly sketch that in, but then get the rest of the sort of finish off the shape of the nose. So now I'm just picking out some of the darker areas of the, I can't think of what, is it muzzle? This sort of soft area here. I'm going to refer to it as the muzzle anyway. It sounds like it could be completely the wrong word, to be honest. But I'm just picking out some of the darkest areas here. I am paying attention to the direction of the fur at this stage. And I'm almost just sketching little lines in there. And you can see just by adding this darker section, which isn't actually a part of the nose, it's sort of to the side of the nose, it's just finishing off that shape nicely. You just bring this light shading up as well. Okay, so now I think I'm splitting this portrait up into sections. I think I'm going to focus just on this area first. So probably get that finished and then we'll move up to the eyes and obviously the ears and her chest. But I'm going to sort of treat this area as one section. So that's what we're going to be working on for now. In fact, I might need to, let me just move the camera down. That's a little bit better. Okay, so now I'm going to actually go in with with a clay tool. Now I got this from the range if you're in the UK, which is just trying to think how to explain it really. They just sell all sorts, but then they have quite a big art section and a craft section. Well, the one local to me does, and I'm pretty sure I got these from there, and they're clay tools. Indenting tools, and you can also get them on Amazon. I think if you actually search for clay tools, something very similar to what I use comes up, and I think I only spent maybe sort of £4, something like that, for a set of them, and I do use them a lot. So the indenting technique, if you look at the reference, Penny has little sort of grey hairs on her chin, sort of under her nose, then also on her chin underneath her mouth. Now she's only 3 and she's always had these little hairs since she was a puppy. So I really like to include obviously details like that, because it's what makes it will make the drawing look like Penny rather than just any Cocker Spaniel. So yeah, it's just those little details to bear in mind, especially if you're working on commissions. I think that those, as I say, those small little details are really important, and they can just make it look, make your drawing look more like the actual pet that you're drawing. So clay tools, and I'm going to literally indent the paper. So I'm looking at my reference, and I'm using quite a hard pressure, but I find with the Fabriano, you don't have to use sort of a really hard pressure. And I'm just almost using this as if it was a pencil, and I'm just sketching in those little grey hairs. So I'm starting with the ones that are under her nose. Now I'm sort of overlapping some of them. They're all generally the same length, but they do sort of go off in different directions. And as I say, I'm sort of crossing some over just so it looks nice and organic. If they're all going in the same direction, it can look a little bit jarring sometimes. So we've got the ones on her chin. And then once we have the indenting tool, I'm also going to sketch in her little whiskers. I like to try and do quite sort of a fast, fluid movement when I'm sketching the whiskers, just so we get that sort of natural curve to them, if that makes sense. So just keep referring to your reference. I mean, I've got mine printed off, and it's right here, so it's directly next to the drawing. And I'm always, I mean, my head is sort of constantly moving backwards and forwards between my drawing and the reference. So yeah, I'm just sort of looking, sketching in any little really sort of white, sharp highlights. I think though, there's sort of the little rogue hair around this area, so I'm just sketching those in as well. Okay, and then back in with our Polychromos Dark Indigo. And we're just going to sketch in the sort of the darker line of the mouth. Okay, so now I want to go around the outside. I'm not going to take it too far, but as I say, all of this sort of dark area here is really important to help make this area stand out, especially all down here. It's actually quite a bright highlight. Now that won't really look like a highlight unless we have this really dark background behind it. So I'm going to sketch some of that in now. Just going directly over those indented whisker lines as well. Now I'm just using a nice light pressure, and I use the term sort of sketching a lot, but I just mean I'm being quite loose with it at this stage. So I think I would class it as sort of sketching. They're quite sketchy lines, and I'm just going the whole way around the edge. Okay, so we can sort of see her nose starting to emerge and her little mouth. But now I call it creating a underpainting, even though obviously it's not a painting, but with this stage, I like to sort of have a really nice light layer where we've mapped in the tones. So we've got the darker tones, the lightest highlights and the mid-tones. And I also like to start to map in some colour as well. And I do all of that before I burnish or add almost any detail, to be honest. I like to know that I've got the tones in the correct places before I then go on to add detail. Because to me, I mean, especially if we're trying to get realism, that's the most important part, getting the dark areas, the darkest areas in the right places, along with the highlights in the right places and the midtones. That's where the realism comes from. You almost don't need the detail for realism, maybe for sort of hyper realism, but I mean, even if you think about the really sort of old paintings, like in the National Gallery, so hundreds of years old, and from a distance they look sort of hyper realistic, and then when you get really close to them, they're actually quite they're sort of made up of exaggerated brush marks. And up close, it doesn't really look that realistic at all. But just because they've got the dark tones, mid-tones and light tones all in the right places, when you step back from it, you get that sort of like amazing realism. So that's why, to me, I like to get all of that done first on the area that I'm working on, and then I add the detail after. Because for me, it's not the most important part of a portrait. So on that note, let's do a little bit of glazing. So Penny's obviously a lovely brown colour, but especially in the daylight, so when I took this picture, she was outside, and I find that I've noticed it sometimes when I'm walking her, that she looks almost purple, and she's got lovely red tones, and I've had sort of like members of the public say as well. I had it when we was on holiday in Whitby in Yorkshire. A man stopped me to say that Penny's a lovely colour and she almost looks sort of purple. She can look blue as well sometimes. But yeah, I think she looks quite purple in this image, but it's just because of when I took the picture, she was obviously outside. So I'm gonna stick with that because that is, to me, how I sort of see Penny. Obviously there is brown tones in there as well, but I do like those sort of warm purpley tones as well. I think they complement the brown nicely. So let's have a look. So I've just got my purples here. I could do with a little bit of test paper actually. Oh, I did put some aside earlier. Yeah, I always recommend, any sort of scrap bit of Fabriano that I have left behind after I've sort of trimmed a portrait down or anything like that, I keep every scrap, because for one, it's quite expensive, this paper, and also I like to have the exact surface that I'm working on to sort of test my pencils on, just to get a good colour match. So now this one is looking quite nice. I'm definitely going to keep that one out. Or maybe I need a little bit of a lighter. Let me look in the browns. Now, I've got a pencil in mind, it's just finding it that's the issue. Okay, I'm going to keep that one out as well, but I don't need it quite yet. Yeah, right, okay, so I'm going to use the Pablo brownish orange, which is almost a bit of a pinky colour. Let me just sharpen that quickly. And I'm just going to begin, so as I say, I'm going to begin to add some colour now. So this lighter section, I'm going to very lightly glaze over the whole thing. And again, when I say glaze, I just mean a nice light, even layer of pencil. Yeah, I'm going to use the Polychromos Caput Mortem. It's one of those pencils, I do use this pencil quite a lot, but it's quite a good match to Penny's Fur as well. So let me just use my little pencil extender. As I say, so this is the Polychromos Caput Mortem. I think the darker one was the Caput Mortem Violet, which is just a little, it's sort of like a darker, more purpley version, I would say, of this pencil. So now I'm just going back into this section here. Still glazing, but I'm just using slightly more pressure. And the nostrils as well. And then I really want to add a nice light purple colour to the top of the nose, just because I think the light was sort of directly hitting there, so there's quite a nice highlight there. It's a little bit too saturated. Okay, I'm going to use the Luminance Ultramarine Violet. And I'm just glazing over the whole, as I say, the sort of top light section of her nose. Really, I'm not worried at all about detail or anything like that at the minute. We're just creating that nice base layer to work from. And then also the little white sections under her nostrils. And then probably a little bit here as well. Okay, and then I'm going to go in with the Luminance Light Aubergine, which is just a real nice, it's almost sort of a greyed out, desaturated purple. I use this pencil a lot actually, the Light Aubergine. And I'm just going to focus in the areas under, directly under the nose. So sort of the darkest areas within this little sort of section that we're working on. So I'm now going to go back in with the Polychromos Dark Indigo, now that we have our nice sort of base layer mapped in and we've started to build some colour up as well. I'm going to go back in with the Polychromos Dark Indigo and begin to add a little bit of the texture and a little bit of the detail. So I'm still being light with my pencil, but my pencil is nice and sharp, and I'm just sort of sketching little individual lines. So I'm just beginning to build up sort of like the darker, Penny's sort of nose area. The fur around it is very soft, it's almost like velvet, so we want to try and get that texture in there. So I'm just picking out the darkest areas again, and as I say, I'm just sort of sketching them in really with little individual pencil lines. And then I'm just gonna start to build up that texture a little bit. So I'm being nice and soft with my pencil marks, so that we can try and get, as I say, that nice sort of soft velvet texture that she has in this area. Right, and then going back into the nose, you'll often find that, so say how we mapped in the darkest areas initially, when you then add the midtones around it, the darker areas don't look as dark as what they need to, if that makes sense. So I like to go back into them, but I prefer to sort of build up the layers like this, rather than just sort of going in with a dark brown and really using a hard pressure and burnishing. I just find that you get a nicer sort of finish to the piece. It looks nice and soft. I do think it's worth just building up these nice light layers. Okay, so now let's add a little bit more colour back in. I'm going to use now I had this issue before. I think I think that this is the Caput Mortem Violet Polychromos. Because this is the Caput Mortem, this one's slightly darker. I've just sharpened, I can see the last few letters, which looks like an O-L-E-T. Yeah, so Caput Mortem Violet Polychromos. Let me just sharpen that quickly. And then I'm just going to sort of, I say glaze, but I am using a little bit of a harder pressure now, and you'll probably find that the tooth of the paper is beginning to fill a little bit. But I'm just going over the dark indigo that we added just now. So it's better to add, instead of just sort of going in with the Caput Mortem Violet, having that dark indigo base underneath it makes this tone darker. So that's why, as I say, that's why we went in with the dark indigo initially. So I'm also glazing over the area that we haven't just gone over with the dark indigo. Furnish some of the lighter areas. I'm going to use the Pablo brownish orange. And I am drawing in sort of individual little lines, but I'm using quite hard pressure now actually. And the lines are quite short, so look at the length of her fur, sort of in the photo reference, and then also the direction that they're going in. I always like to have them sort of going in the same general direction, but then I do cross my lines over each other as well, just so we don't get that sort of really sort of harsh line where everything's just going in the same direction. just lightly glazing on the top of the nose here. So I think we need some reds and purples in there. Now I'm going to use the Polychromos Magenta. And I'm just glazing, just going over the Caput Mortuum violet areas. And then I also want to glaze with the Polychromos Manganese Violet. Now I don't know if I've already said this, but the Manganese Violet is a pencil that I use constantly. It's probably in my top 5 most used pencils, with regardless of whatever I'm drawing. I really like to glaze with it. So if I want to sort of make tones look a little bit warmer, I'll often use a Manganese Violet to glaze. Which is what we're going to do now. So and the tooth of the paper is beginning to fill quite nicely now, which is sort of telling me that we need to start to really burnish and then add the final sort of details and texture. Over this nose as well. Nice tones. This is my warm grey pot of pencils. So I divide my greys into warm greys and cool greys. Now mostly in here actually is Prismacolors. I find that Prismacolors have such a nice range of grey tones. And they're nice to burnish with as well. So I do use those more often than I used to. I think I can see a violet grey right at the bottom. Absolutely tiny. But yeah, so I'm going to use the Luminance Violet Grey. I think I've got about 6 or 7 of these violet grey pencils, but they're all just this sort of size. So I always struggle to find them. Yeah, it's a really nice, I sort of, I always say it's like a purple. I mean, it's called violet grey, so I'd say it's like a really desaturated purple tone. And I'm just going to begin to burnish the top of the nose. I'm using sort of a medium pressure, so I'm not completely burnishing, but I'm just using a nice sort of small circular motion with my pencil, which means that we get a really nice sort of smooth finish. And then underneath the nostrils as well. Okay, so now I feel like we really need to add those darker tones in. I am going to actually go in with the black. Now I don't often use a sort of solid black pencil, but actually I was looking at this reference earlier and I think there is going to be, I think under here, I'm going to actually use solid black for that. I like this image because it's very contrasted and it sort of catches your eye. Normally, yeah, I probably wouldn't use the solid black sort of in the fur because obviously Penny's brown, but I really do like the sort of depth that it gives the photo reference. So I think we will be using black around the edge here. So Polychromos black. And I'm just going to now completely burnish the nostrils. And when I say burnish, I just mean I'm using quite a hard pressure and I'm completely filling the tooth of the paper. Oh, nice brand new pencil. I love using a brand new pencil. I ran out of my dark sepias probably last week or maybe a couple of weeks ago. So I did a restock and I ordered loads of the dark indigos and loads of the dark sepias, the polychromos, just to keep me really stocked up. So dark sepia, and I'm just going to start to burnish the nose now. So again, I'm using a small circular motion with the pencil. And I'm not burnishing the whole of the bottom section, I'm looking at this little triangle shape, then picking out the darkest areas within that little shape. Okay, now I've done this line a little bit too thick, so I'm going to go in with my electric eraser and just sketch some of those little sort of white hairs that they sort of come across this line of the mouth. My electric eraser, by the way, I just got it from Amazon a few years ago. The brand is Tenwin, but it's really good. I'd recommend it to anyone, to be honest. I use it a lot. So now, let's do a little bit of glazing before we then add the black, I think, around the edge of the nose here. So I'm going to go in with a Polychromos Deep Scarlet Red, which is a pencil that I use a lot for glazing. So at the minute, I often find that when I burnish with dark sepia, it ends up looking quite flat. So I then like to go in and glaze. So I'm using, as I say, it's a very bright red. It's the Polychromos Deep Scarlet Red. But as I'm glazing, it's just sort of warming up that brown nicely. Just sort of lightly glazing up the edge here as well. Yeah, it really just helps to get the nice warm tones. And then, so let's go in. Actually, before I go in with the black, I'm going to go back in with the dark sepia, nice and sharp. And I'm just going to add the little sort of fur texture, the details in this area under the nose. So just keep referencing your, I keep saying it, but you really have to sort of, as you're drawing, keep looking from your drawing to your photo reference. And I never, with pieces like this or with fur, I don't think it ever has to be obviously exactly the same as the reference. I like to sort of get a general sort of feel for the fur. So at the minute, I'm just sort of, I know that there's like little darker areas in this section, so I'm just sort of loosely, I like to say sort of sketching a lot, but I do feel like that's what it is. I feel like I'm just sort of loosely sketching these in. I'm just being quite free with it. So now I'm going to go in with my eraser, and I'm just going to lightly, I'm almost using it to sort of blend. So I'm just going around here, so around the very lightest little highlighted area. And I'm not completely erasing, I'm just sort of lightening this sort of line here. And then you'll find it sort of nicely blends into the dark area here that we've been working on. Now, as I say, I like this reference because the highlights are quite bold and then the darker tones are really, really dark. So it's quite a sort of contrasted, almost a dramatic image. So I want to really make sure I capture that with the drawing. So that means having the highlights light. And then obviously, as I was saying a minute ago, I'm going to be using black around here. It's just something to bear in mind when choosing an image to draw. I think lighting is really, really important. Probably the most important thing, to be honest, that I would look for in a drawing, in a photo reference, sorry, to draw. So going in now with our black pencil again, Polychromos black. Nice and sharp, I'm just going to begin to work around the edge here. Now I'm really paying attention to the shape of the muzzle here. And then also you'll find that it's made up of lots of little sort of tiny little hairs coming off here. So I don't want to just sort of draw around it and burnish it all in. I want to sort of sketch those little hairs in just to get that texture. But I am using quite a hard pressure, and I am burnishing this area. But as you can see, I'm just sort of using little lines when I get to the very edge of the nose here, to just get that sort of the fur texture and the highlight. Okay, so I've mapped in the darkest section around the edge here. That's all we need for now. Obviously we'll carry on with it when we sort of work on the ear and everything like that, but I just wanted, it's more just this line that I feel like we needed. So now that's in there and we've gone under the mouth as well, I just want to burnish the nostrils again, just so that they're as dark as this area here. And then this little mouth as well. Okay, so I'm now going to go in with the Luminance Ultramarine Violet. Just completely burnishing now this top section of the nose. And then I'm also going to glaze a little bit going up this side actually. So now I'm going in with the Luminance Burnt Sienna. And I'm just going right over these sort of areas that we've just lightened up with the eraser. Okay, in with the Luminance Light Aubergine again. And I'm just burnishing basically all of the areas now that need, the tooth of the paper hasn't quite been filled. Just sketching in some texture here as well. Really look at the direction of the fur. So now I'm using the Pablo white and I'm using a hard pressure now, and I'm just picking out the lightest details on the top of the nose. underneath the nostrils as well. And then I'm also going over the indented lines, whilst also just sketching in some extra lines, which because they haven't been indented, they will look softer. It's nice to have sort of the two, so some of the sharper details and some softer, light details as well. Now as I say, I'm using a really hard pressure here, completely filling the tube of the paper. Now in with the Polychromos black, and I'm just going over this whole area, just picking out the darkest, sharper details. And then going back in with the Polychromos Deep Scarlet Red. And just glazing again. Okay, so just to finish off this area, I'm now going to add the sort of the final details really. I feel like we have all of the tones in the right places. We have some build-up of texture, but I just, in the very sort of last stages, I like to add the final details and the sharpest details as well. So I'm going to go in with the Luminance Carmine Lake. Which is just a really, really nice, rich, dark brown colour. So I'm just burnishing now, so I'm using quite a hard pressure. The Luminances are quite a soft pencil, so you don't have to use a really sort of hard pressure to get a lot of pigment onto the paper. So I'm just going over the little sort of mouth line, and then I'm just referring to my reference and picking out any little dark shapes. We've got some little lines under here. Now I'm just sketching little individual lines here just to get that nice soft fur texture in there. And then I'm also going back into the nose. Now, there isn't a huge amount of detail in this nose, but there is some little sort of lines at the top here. I'm gonna just begin to sketch those in. And then sort of around the nostrils as well. And then I'm going to go in with my electric eraser. And I'm just going to add some of the sharper little sort of dots on the nose. Yeah, so I'm almost just sort of drawing with this as if I'm just adding sort of little dots to the page. Then I'm just going to sort of glaze over those with the Caput Mortem. Not all of them, just to push them back a little bit, but you can see the highlights are still sort of visible. So just in the sort of darker areas, I'm glazing over them. I'm leaving all of these ones up here. Okay, and then I might just, still using my electric eraser, I'm just going to sketch a few more of these white hairs in. And then I'm going to go in with the Derwent Lightfast Pale Peach. And then pretty much what we've just done with the Carmine Lake Luminance. I'm just picking out those final sort of really light details. Obviously I was picking out the dark details with the Carmine Lake. Carmine Lake. And then finally, to finish off this area, I'm going back in with the Polychromos Black and just glazing now, because I mean, the tooth of the paper is pretty much completely filled. So I'm just using a nice light pressure. And just to finish off the area, I like to just go back into the very, very darkest areas. And as I say, I'm just sort of lightly glazing over them. Okay, so I think I will leave that there. Now, normally when I draw, so for example, I think next I'll be going up and working on the eyes up here. I often do then, sort of as I'm blending the eyes into this section, I might potentially go back into this section, just to sort of blend it all together and make sure it all balances out nicely. So I don't like to sort of call an area completely finished and then move on, because I mean, there's a chance I'll probably go back into this. I'd say it's sort of like 98% finished. So yeah, that's why I think it would be a good place to leave it there. I hope that you enjoyed part 1 of my penny tutorial, which was obviously drawing a Cocker Spaniel's nose and mouth area. In part 2, I think I'm going to focus on the eyes. I think that feels like the most sort of organic place to sort of move up to next. Thank you for watching if you got this far, and if you want to see the rest of the tutorial, please like and subscribe to my channel. I will also leave the link for my Patreon channel in the description of this video. With my Patreon, I upload Patreon exclusive tutorials every month, and they are also completely unedited as well. So with this tutorial, just for YouTube, I've sort of sped up certain areas, but with my Patreon tutorials, they're completely unedited, so you get the full sort of version of me drawing, if that makes sense. I will hopefully see you in part 2 of this tutorial.